Well, hello, Mama Bears. My name is Ray Waters. I'm sitting beside Stan Mitchell, and we are in Atlanta, Georgia for this live event, and we are so excited about being with you. And we're going to spend an hour, and we're just going to take questions from you. We're going to talk a little bit about what brought us together in the forming of Everybody Church, and we are very, very excited about the day. Stan, I'm so glad you're here, and can I get us started by just asking you, how did you get in touch with all these people in the Mama Bears group? How did that happen?
Geez, Ray, I started hearing 3 years ago about this gal down in Dallas named Liz Dyer.
Liz Dyer.
That was leading a formidable movement of practical theologians.
Right.
And church leaders.
Right.
Not from the pulpit side and the seminary side, but from the pew side. So I started telling these stories. I had no idea. I immediately found out that if you talk theology on Facebook, you're going to get a lot of comments and a lot of arguments. To what end? I'm not sure. And a certain amount of people responding. But as Parker Palmer said, it's amazing that a religion so vested in incarnation gets lost in disembodied concepts. And man, I found that to be the case when I started telling these stories, just the real stories of kids that were coming out, college-age kids that were struggling to tell their parents reaching out to me with, suicidal children. And I just began to put the pathos of these stories, on Facebook, and immediately the response tripled and quadrupled and quintupled. It was 10 times the response of just abstract theology. I was immediately heartened because I was overwhelmed. I thought, man, what am I going to do? It was a part of why we have done Everybody Church, which we'll talk about in a moment. We had to respond to all of these people who were commenting and reaching out to me. We had to respond in a pastoral, loving way. But immediately the support came from the Mama Bears. I literally would have had to shut down that Facebook ministry because it was too much. And I just couldn't field everything. But the support of the Mama Bears made it possible. The way they voraciously just attacked the situation, not with violence, but with love.
With love.
Again and again and again, I have these stories, and I'm relating these stories, and the people are obviously anonymous. They have to be anonymous. They're still in often very critical phases of their coming out. But the people were privately asking me time and time again, and it still happens, who are these women? What in the world is a Mama Bear? Who are these women from Delaware and Idaho and Texas who don't even know me but are telling me, we'll drive down there.
Yeah.
We'll take care of you. You come live with us.
Yeah.
That's the Mama Bears.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
I know it's been a beautiful thing, and I know my wife was able to go a couple of weeks ago and spend time with Mama Bears in Nashville. And she said it was just one of the great experiences of her life. She's been very excited to be a Mama Bear.
It's a phenomenal movement. I suppose the thing that I was hoping for in this time, the short time that we have, is for us to really just speak directly into the lives of these people. Right now, there are more than, how many Mama Bears? It's up over 5,000?
Yes, over 5,000, yeah.
A couple of years ago, when I was working with the Mama Bears, I think we were at like 1,200. So it's kind of beginning to grow exponentially, and there's just no telling where it's going to go. But I wanted to just remember that there are a lot of these Mama Bears, a lot of you who are just joining, who are absolutely brand new to this process, and you're raw. The wounds are tender, and the concern is deep, and there's a lot of fear and a lot of emotion right now. So I wanted us to spend our time more than anything just putting ourselves inside the heads and the hearts of these women and just kind of ministering to them. And we're also open. They can ask questions.
Sure, questions. Make sure you just, in the live stream right now, if you want to ask a question, you certainly can. We have many questions we'd love to talk about if you don't put them in today, but we'd love to have a question directly from you. Stan, I'm wondering, or I'm thinking about a mom who perhaps is just, they've been hurt, they've maybe left church, there's been just this kind of a situation of not knowing where they are and how to navigate. And then people from if they have a church background, from their former church background, are throwing Bible verses at them and basically saying, are you doing the right thing? And wanting them to be able to have a proof text to go back to them. How do you process that? Because maybe somebody's brand new and this would be helpful to them.
Well, I think there are hundreds probably in that very case, maybe more than 1,000 in that very case right now in the Mama Bear community. I mean, we have to remember, number one, that you're not alone. That's one of the most important things about the Mama Bears. It provides a sense of community that lets people know you're not crazy, you're not a reprobate, you're not a heretic. Others have walked this road ahead of you, and there's joy at the end of this road. There's even joy in this road. So what you're feeling right now, I remember it was Russ Taff who called me at a very low moment in my life, and I'll never forget. I wasn't even strong enough at that moment to pick up the phone. And Russ Taff, the great singer that you and I both love, on the other end of the line, Russ said, I just wanted to say to you, Stan. And then he paused. He said, I just wanted to say that it won't always feel this way.
Oh, wise.
And I will never forget just the simplicity, but the gravity of those words. And I want to look in the camera, and I want to say to so many of the new Mama Bears that the complexity of your pain and confusion right now is overwhelming, and you may even feel like you're drowning. I want to say what Russ said to me and say it with all the veracity and force that I can. I promise you, Liz Dyer, Sarah Cunningham promise you something that we know, and that is it won't always feel this way. There is joy that's coming in the morning. This may be the weeping night, but you are going to, I don't want to say make it through this process, because this process is sacred, and it has other chapters that you can't even foresee or predict right now. But you're going to get to the other side of the pain and the confusion. And it is a well-worn path. The reason there is an organization called Serendipitydodah, which is this organization for Mama Bears that Liz Dyer started, is because Liz was there.
Right.
The reason Sarah Cunningham is doing free mom hugs and Jamie Lee Curtis is buying her story and wanting to make that story is because she was there.
Right.
All of the women that we know that are in Mama Bears, that are the force of Mama Bears, the ground, the foundation of Mama Bears, they all were in this place. And it reminds me of the words of the Apostle Paul when he said, if I was greatly afflicted, it's for your sake.
Yeah.
Because when I was greatly afflicted, I was greatly comforted. And I now comfort others with the comfort that God has comforted me with. And that's exactly what Sarah and Liz are doing. They know that there is a place on the other side of the pain, and it's a beautiful place. But the pain, and this is what you were really asking, the pain comes from the conflict between the love you have for your child, the love you have for your family member. The pain is when that love stands in conflict with what has always been, or at least now and for a significant length of time, has been the most important thing in your life, which is your faith. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I say it's the most important thing in your life, but your children, in their own way, are the most important. Your family is the most important thing in your life. I mean, think about what these people are going through, these families are going through, not just moms, but dads and siblings, and even the people themselves, the LGBTQ community. It's a painful collision of your faith and the love you have for your family member or the love you have for yourself. What do you do when those two things in contradictory fashion collide and you feel like they cannot make peace?
Right.
That's where these people are, and we've seen that again and again.
Jeez. Do you have, like in the early days, I'm sure you were attacked. I know I was attacked by, I want to say well-meaning people from my church background, but they, you know, you don't know the Bible, you're going against the Bible, all of these kind of things. I found that I could never argue the scripture with them. That never led to any kind of result because they weren't open to that. They were not open to a different understanding, a different interpretation. I couldn't get them to see how wrong the church had been on so many other social issues through the ages. I could not get them to understand. And so I finally had to just decide, I'm not going to argue. I tell stories, try to tell stories, but I don't give myself much time to get into these arguments back and forth. I don't know if that has been your experience, but it certainly has been mine.
To date, and you know, I began flipping on this issue as far back as 20 years ago.
Right.
It was 2012 that Grace Point, the church that I founded and have been a part of since 2003, Grace Point began the process of even discussing this in 2012. We made full inclusion in 2015. In all of those years, sitting here right now, I cannot think of one moment where I've ever changed anybody's mind or even seen their mind changed afterwards based on, argumentation and the parsing of Scripture. The reality is the Bible is interpretable. If it wasn't interpretable, there wouldn't be 40,000 denominations.
Yeah, great.
And when I think about, the fact that as much as I want to change somebody's mind through the debate of Scripture, well, I put myself in their shoes. Nobody changed my mind. That's not the way my mind changed.
Right.
So when I think about the way my mind changed, and I think about the way people like Liz and Sarah and your mind changed, I go back, it's through human interaction. I mean, the reality is throughout human history, throughout church history especially, the church always flips on issues as we are driven by human experience and human need back to the text saying, have we read this properly? Yeah. Again and again and again, the real reformations that happen in the Christian church do not happen from the ivory tower back. They happen from the pew forward. Literally, people begin to have human experiences that build up in their life that are dissonant or seemingly contradictory with their received dogma. And that's the tension. And ultimately, the pain is enough that it drives them back to the text, asking the question with some measure of humility, have I read this faithfully? Is there another way of reading this text? And you and I both know, I mean, if there's anything that church history tells us, that's exactly the way every reform has started. I mean, it always begins with us, driven by human need, back to the text, with our hearts open to the Spirit, because generally, and I said this the other day, what generally opens the mind is a broken heart.
For sure.
And I would give anything if there was an easier way to come to the opening of mind. But for most of us, the opening of our mind begins with the breaking of our heart. And in the breaking of your heart, you're laid low enough, you're humbled, humus, you're brought down to the earth where your heart is laid bare and you're willing to hear another way. And so, again and again, a lot of new mama bears send me messages, and the question is always, what do I say to my brother? What do I say to my child's father? What do I say to my friends? What do I say to the people at my church? And I always encourage them, you're not obligated to say anything. This is not their journey. This is your journey. And share your journey. I don't tell people what they should believe. I don't tell people what they want to believe. But when they ask me, I ask them, well, if you're willing to hear how I changed, if you're willing to hear my story, I can tell you a story, and it's not about Romans 1 and 1 Timothy 2 and Leviticus and the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. When I begin telling my story, it's about Uncle Mike, and it's about my cousin, and it's about the kid in my class that we tortured that ultimately died before he was 30 years old of cirrhosis of the liver. It's the story of Larry at the church that I pastored, and the young fundamentalist Baptist former minister that came to me and confessed, and I destroyed him with the biblical text.
Right.
These stories ultimately drove me in my own life, and you're going to have to take your journey. So I really don't encourage people to argue the text. If somebody really presses me and says, but what do you do with Romans 1? I immediately go to, David Gushie's book or Matthew Vine's book or Colby Martin's book, and I say, here are some books. If you really want to know.
Yeah.
But I'm
they
not
won't
going
even
to
read them.
this
They
down.
don't read them. I've discovered that usually, I don't know that I've had one experience when I have made the whole case and I thought maybe they'll read something. They don't read it. I wish they would, but I don't think usually that they do.
The reason why is because most of the time, and this sounds judgmental, but most of the time when somebody is saying, how could you possibly read Romans 1:27 differently?
Right.
It's a rhetorical question. They're not leaning forward and saying, help me see how I could possibly read this differently. It's, how could you? They're wanting an argument there. And I don't have the energy for it. And nor do you. Don't spend energy trying to justify this for anybody. Take your journey with your child, and that person's going to have to take their journey. The reality is they're playing with plastic chips. They're playing with monopoly money.
This.
You're playing with every dime you have in the world. Children, are our decision to take our hearts out of our chest and let them go walking around in the world unprotected. And when you start playing with your heart on the table, the stakes are raised. And that's why I say all the time, mama bears and the parents of LGBT kids are actually the true prophets in the Christian church, because the rest of us are just abstracting about esoteric ideas. You are actually playing the real game with real money on the line, and for that reason, you're the most credible.
You say they have skin in the game. It's like they really do have skin in the game. I like that.
Skin in the game, that's incarnation.
Yeah.
That's the basis of the Christian faith. Mama bears are incarnational, and their journeys are incarnational. And frankly, Ray, I'm not saying this just because I'm online with the mama bears right now. I more and more have no doubt that movements like the mama bears are actually going to be the greater fuel and impetus to this Reformation than preachers like you and me and academics writing books. I appreciate what we're doing. I appreciate the academics. But I honestly believe that this is going to be a grassroots movement, and movements like Mama Bears are at the forefront of this Reformation.
Well, I think that's beautiful. I love that. Neil, any questions yet? Well, how can they pray for us?
Wow, that's a great question. I mean, they're asking us how they can pray for us.
Yeah.
We're wanting to pray for them. You know, I don't know. How can they pray for you?
I don't know. Let's talk about Everybody Church, because maybe that can be a place that we all can kind of come together on. And let me just tell you how Everybody Church started. So I'm pastoring a church in Atlanta called The Village, and Stan's pastoring Grace Point. And we actually had a group of people at our house for a large LGBTQ meeting. We're getting ready to go to Pride, so we had this large meeting of our LGBT brothers and sisters, and we're sitting around the table. We're just telling our stories, everybody's talking, and one of the people in our church said, Ray, I don't want to be a part of a gay church. I want to be a part of a everybody church. And Neil was sitting at the table, I was sitting at the table, and that was like, oh my gosh, that's a great, because we've used that kind of verbiage before, that's a great way to say it. Neil, in his unique brilliance, goes home and looks up the URL to see if that possibly is available. And he found Everybody Church was available. So I remember saying to you, you're doing all this work. Wouldn't it be cool if there was a service, if there was some way that we could present something? Because some people can't go to church anymore. They've either just totally walked away defeated, or they don't have a church like the Village or like Grace Point or some of these other churches. And you said, yeah, it seemed to resonate with you that maybe we could do something online that could be a genuine church, that people who are coming out of church or maybe don't have any church experience, but they could at least find that sense of community. Do you remember, did I was thinking about how you remember it?
I honestly, for me, Everybody Church feels like a daughter ministry of Serendipitydodah.
Yeah, I agree.
I've never told Liz that, but it really feels like the Mama Bears was not just the focus group, but really a huge piece, a predominant piece of the group that we were really wanting to impact. Because what I was finding was, Grace Point does an incredible ministry in Nashville, Village does a ministry here. But the people who were reaching out to me online were people who were more and more becoming estranged from church. I mean, these were people who were now, I still am doing it, they're just coming to grips with either their orientation, their identity, or they're coming to grips with the fact that their 14-year-old is suicidal, and they're finding out that it centers around what their child is being told in their Sunday school class, and the parents being confronted with all of this in their own heart and mind. And what I'm realizing is these aren't people who are geographically approximate to a Village or a Forefront in New York, or a Morgantown community in Morgantown, Kentucky, or a Grace Point. These are people who are geographically, and I think it was you who said there are a lot of people who aren't just geographically separated, but you alluded to it a moment ago, they're emotionally and psychologically separated.
They don't want to come back. They've been hurt, and they don't know
I mean, even if they live down the street from the Village, they are not ready to walk back in to a preacher and an offering and songs and all of that. The bruises are too raw for them. So we just felt like, and I also was being overwhelmed, literally, pastorally, because for every one of the stories that I tell online, there are another 10 to 12 that I don't tell.
Right.
And all of these stories come with a certain measure of pastoral care that's necessary. I mean, when somebody tells you that their 17-year-old is talking about, suicidal ideation, you can't just say, I'm praying for you. There's an ethical responsibility as pastors. And so periodically you notice that I have to slow down online. I don't post every day because I'm catching up to the backlog. Well, we thought that Everybody Church, and it's doing this, could actually create a matrix, a community that could develop into a cyber church where people connect. And you and I mean, we're old school. A year or two ago, I don't know that we really believed that a community could develop wholly online. And yet we're watching that happen. We're watching love be exchanged, services be exchanged, pastoral care really happen in Everybody Church. I mean, we're only a couple of months old, but already we're seeing the interaction of what? Hundreds, not thousands, every week.
Thousands. And I think this last week, over 7,000 engagements to one degree or another.
Right.
And so that was people all over, as far as Australia to all over the United States. And again, so many are the mama bears who are watching, and they're so encouraging. They get online and they respond to the talks, and it's been really a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it really has. And as much as we say it's Everybody Church, it is indeed Everybody Church, but it is specifically and primarily tailored for those who have been marginalized, those who have been ostracized, those who are, as Richard Rohr calls them, the outsiders. If there is a gospel, and I believe there is a gospel, it is that the outsiders are the insiders. And Everybody Church is a place where we do our desperate best to flip that and let everybody know that they belong.
And if I could share this, I thought it was 2006, 2007, things began to change for me. I did my first same-sex marriage actually in Massachusetts in 2011. And as I began to hang around people like you, and I saw the Mama Bear stuff, and I began to think, we're just right on the edge. Probably all the evangelical churches are just about to they're about to all flip our way. They're going to get this. They've got to get it. Look at how beautiful this is. Look how wonderful these people are. But then I realized, no, we are still on the front edge of this movement, and it may take a long time. And so I imagine that there are many people who watch, and they really don't have, there might be some mainline churches they feel very comfortable in, but if it's an evangelical church, they probably don't have an evangelical church that they can call home where they feel like their same-sex orientated child is welcomed or brother is welcomed, I would think. I thought it would be a quicker process, and I'm realizing we still have a long ways to go.
Yeah, we all are looking for Gladwell's tipping point on this. But, and I think there are minor fulcrum tipping point moments, but I mean, think about what women have gone through. Think about what people of color have gone through. There are no tipping points that resolve marginalization.
Right.
At our base, human beings still are very lizard brain driven. We are survival of the fittest, and majority groups still have the darker angels of our nature and the capacity to marginalize and estrange the weaker or the lesser or the minority groups who are lesser because of their numbers or their entitlements or their access. So I think I think we're in it for the long haul. And yet at the same time, as much as I believe this is a long drawn out process, flipping that survival mechanism, that fear, and bringing us all to a point of equanimity and equality, you and I both know that where we were a few years ago, and where we were a few years ago was miserable.
Right.
Because in our own hearts, we weren't dealing with, a gay child, but we were dealing with people, LGBTQ parishioners. And we knew that the church, the gospel music industry, the Christian church, our musical programs in church were literally dependent on the backs of these LGBTQ siblings of ours. And so we were in this miserable, disingenuous, don't ask, don't tell policy. And we were having pangs of conscience about that because we knew that we were treating these people like the Syrophoenician woman. I mean, you remember that woman in Scripture that came to Jesus and she wanted him to heal her daughter, and Jesus trying to reveal how ridiculous religious mentality was at that time toward people who were non-Jewish, like this Gentile woman. Jesus looked at her and in a caricatured way just put it out there, and he said, woman, I can't minister to you because you're a Gentile, and I don't give the king's food to dogs. And the woman looked at him and said, I may be a dog, but even dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. And Jesus, with pause, then sees that as a teaching moment and said, I haven't seen faith like that in Israel. And Ray, you and I both know that the Christian church has been made up of a large percentage of LGBTQ people who have been willing to co-conspire in their own diminishment and stay quiet. They have been willing, as I say, to eat the crumbs that fall from the church's table, the wine-soaked crumbs of communion. They have been so hungry that they've been willing to do that. And we couldn't take it. We couldn't bear it. And we're not the only ones. There are ministers. I want to say to the mama bears who are concerned or have had horrible conversations with their pastors, don't give up. Because I had those same horrible conversations. I was a fool. And I was selfish and narcissistic. But eventually the Spirit did its work on me. And I believe this movement is not just happening in the hearts of parents. I believe it's happening in the hearts of pastors who are not parenting their congregation, but have an intimate relationship with their parishioners and have seen the pain. And preachers are towing the pulpits or the thresholds of pulpits all around this country that know that they're wrong on this issue. And they're looking for encouragement. And they're looking for the guts, actually, is what they're looking for. They're looking for the integrity to do the right thing. And I'm sitting here now, and I'm not lauding what you and I did because we should have done it quicker.
Right. Oh, yeah.
I hurt people longer than I should have. And I want to tell the mama bears that you are a tour de force. And I think you have a grave responsibility to get your child out of that church, but to not completely estrange yourself from that community. You need to hold their feet to the fire.
That's what I was going to ask you. So you would say you're in a church and you have a child and that church is not affirming. You say you've got to get out. You've got to get out.
You know, again, I don't want to, as we say in the 12-step world, should on anybody.
Right.
I want to be very careful because I have wonderful friends who've made a different decision to stay within and try to be salt in a situation, to try to be light in a dark situation. I do have great concern about subjecting a child to that responsibility. I do know, 1 Peter 2, Peter's injunction to slaves in the first century was to be submissive to their masters. Mm-hmm. He said, even if they beat you without cause, for to this you were called by Christ. For Christ left us an example, who when reviled not again, but entrusted himself into the hands of him who judges righteously. And then Peter says, and that was salvific for us. It was redemptive for us because all of us like sheep were going astray, but we've been brought home by the shepherd of our soul, who through crucifixion has shown us the divine love of God. On one hand, that's remarkably beautiful. On the other hand, it's troubling.
Right, me too.
Because based upon Christ's willingness to be crucified on behalf of those crucifying him, the Petrine writer is saying to slaves, subject yourself to unjust abuse in an effort to redeem the very person who's abusing you. I'll tell you what's really problematic about that is that's 1 Peter 2. 1 Peter 3 flows exactly directly out of that. And 1 Peter 3 begins with, in the same way, you wives. In the same way as what? Slaves. In the same way, you wives be submissive to your husbands, even if they're disobedient to the word. For in doing so, you might win them when they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. Ray, you and I both know, and it's a shame, that based on that text, the Christian church encouraged and lauded women to stay in abusive relationships.
I contributed.
In an effort to save, to save the sorry husband that was abusing them. And King even used that text to to not just encourage his followers to nonviolent resistance, but to encourage them to the point of abuse in an effort to redeem the abuser when the abuser sees their nonviolent resistance. I mean, you were talking about C.T. Vivian last night and the images of that sheriff hitting him in the water, blood coming down, or, what was it, John Lewis, one of those great leaders in the civil rights movement. I don't know, if adults want to subject themselves to abuse, to follow the methodology of Christ in an effort to redeem the abusers, adults can do what adults want to do. I have feelings about that. But to choose that for your children, to take your child, your 14-year-old, your 17-year-old, your 11-year-old, back to a church because your family's been there for 5 generations and you love the people and you don't know where else to go and you're scared to leave your community. I get it. But to subject your child to hearing that they're less than, that they're not the beloved of God, that something is inherently wrong with them, I don't know. I have strong feelings about that, and I don't know. That's all I'll say about that.
We have a beautiful couple in our church, 2 ladies, and I remember they wrote me, they had heard about the village and they wanted to bring their family, but they wrote me like a 3-page letter because they were very concerned that anything would be said that would in any way make their children feel like they were less than because they were growing up with 2 moms. And I always thought it was very wise that they did that. And of course, they've been now with us for 5 years. But let me ask you this. A lot of people are associated with the Methodist Church. And we, of course, watched that whole procedure. Any thoughts on kind of what's going on there? Because I know you have friends that are in the Methodist Church.
I almost read to you right before we came here. A United Methodist pastor in the Nashville area just wrote to me wanting to get together. He's on the side that we're on of full inclusion, yet he's in a denomination that's not allowing that right now. And he's desperately trying to figure out what to do with his local congregation, with his own soul, and with his vocational life, because he stands, the potential of being defrocked for following his conscience on this. I don't know, I have to have a lot of patience. There's a tension here for me. I have to have a lot of patience with people who are in the process, because I was in the process. This was not an overnight flip for me. And it wasn't all because I couldn't find courage and I didn't have enough integrity. A lot of it was I did have integrity, and I had been taught something that I was trying to be faithful to, and I had to make it make sense in my mind, and that did not happen overnight for me. It took a lot of Matthew Vine's books and a lot of David Gushie's and a lot of reading for me, and a lot of conversations and a lot of prayer before I flip. So I want to say I have a lot of compassion for people who are in the process, denominations who are really wrestling with this. And yet at the same time, with that said, my patience is wearing thin. Because I do think as time moves on, as much as my past, I feel like Saul of Tarsus, who became Paul. I was a persecutor of the church. I was a persecutor of this group of people. How dare me get up on a high horse now and, look condescendingly at those, because I did the exact same thing. And yet there's a point where you got to get on the other side of it and say, simply because I was wrong, I cannot, I cannot justify you taking your time with this because kids are dying.
Right.
These children are dying. Their suicide rates, their drug addiction rates, their mental illness rates, depression rates, homelessness rates, their rates are so off the charts compared to cisgender heterosexual kids that simply because I'm embarrassed at my own lagging process. The reality is we know more than we did 6 years ago. The information on this matter is exponential. The medical science, the psychological science, the empirical, even anecdotal evidence. With the advent of social media, we know too much. And we cannot continue to grade on the curve of ignorance. We know too much. And So, people staying in denominations, ministers staying in denomination. I tell my minister friends in the United Methodist Church, if you want to stay in that denomination, absolutely. But when the next couple looks at you and says, will you marry us? To deny them the sacrament, I believe is sinful.
Yeah.
And I think, and when someone says, but I have to deny them the sacrament because there's the greater issue of keeping the body together. The body of Christ is a lot bigger than the United Methodist Church. Keeping a denomination together and keeping the body of Christ together is not the same thing. And I would be more concerned about putting back together the broken heart of that couple who've been refused sacraments in the place, the church that they grew up in. I'm more concerned about putting their hearts back together, mending their hearts, than I am keeping a denomination together that is recalcitrant and lagging. So, yeah, stay in your denomination, but one of the greatest things you can do for your denomination is to be willing to be defrocked by it.
Yeah,
one of the greatest things you can do for your church is to be willing to be kicked out of it on the grounds of conscience.
We have a friend that you know her particularly well, Anna Galladay. She did that, right? Wasn't that her story? She did a same-sex wedding. She was a Methodist minister. It was her life, her calling, everything. But she said she stood with her congregation 24 hours a day, and for 1 hour, standing with this one couple and performing wedding vows for them, they defrocked her. And but she was beautiful the way she talks about it with such passion, and she knew she did the right thing.
Yeah, and Anna is still United Methodist.
Yeah.
Now, she may not be, this is the beautiful thing about her. It's one of the reasons she's one of my heroes. She's still United Methodist. She's been a part of that denomination for a long time. Somebody says, well, didn't she lose her ordination? Well, yeah, she lost her ordination, but ordination comes from God.
It does.
Ordination is simply technically sanctioned by human bodies. And Anna Galladay is more ordained. If she's watching, she knows it. She is more ordained than she's ever been. And she went to St. Louis.
Right.
Defrocked or not, she went. These are her people, her denomination. So when I see people like her staying a part of the denomination, willing to suffer at the hands of her denomination, and yet lovingly still commit to them and believe better things for them, yes, I appreciate that process. But I think that's a far cry from subjecting our children to Sunday school teachers and ministers and youth pastors and messages that convey to them that they're less than. I think we have to protect our children from that kind of abuse.
You know, I went a couple of days ago. My mom was in a Easter pageant at her church, and it was the evangelical church, and I went, and I did it because of my love for my mom. I watched her in the choir sing, but I would have a hard time going weekly to a church where I knew some of my family members would be excluded. I just know in my lifetime, I just could not do that. I could not go to a church and feel like it was that was where I needed to be.
I love what Anne Lamott said. She said, if I get up there one day,
Right.
and the gates swing open for me because I was in the right group and did the right things and signed the right papers, and God seeks to let me in, and then I turn around and see loving good people from my life excluded, she said, I hope I have the guts to pick it outside the gate.
I think that's beautiful.
Which I think that's the heart of Jesus. And I remember when I was 11 years old, my brother's 2 years older, so he was always that big brother, still my big brother that I look up to and love. But I used to tag along with him everywhere. And 2 years doesn't seem like a lot at 51 and 53, but 11 and 13, it was a big difference. And my brother had a lot of friends in our neighborhood, and I was always kind of interrupting the process for them, but my brother was always gracious to make sure that I was there. I remember one summer we had a boring day at home, and we decided to go out, looking through the neighborhood for a game to play or something to do or guys to hang out with. And we came upon a basketball game, and it was 7 or 8 of my brother's friends, 2 grades older, 2 years older. And I remember they turned around, and I think they had an odd number. And they saw my brother and ignored me completely. And they said, hey, Stevie, come on, get in the game. And I remember I was standing there, ignored, feeling like I wasn't seen, wasn't worth anything. And my heart broke as I watched my brother move off away from me to go play the game. And I sat down Indian style on the ground. I started watching them, and a little bit I felt sad enough and left out enough that I got up and I started walking home. And I remember short way into my trip home hearing somebody behind me. I looked around, here came my brother jogging. And I said, "Where are you going?" He said, he's very understated. He said, "Oh, I thought I'd go with you." I said, "Well, is the game over?" He said, "No, they're still playing." But he said, "I figured if there wasn't room for you, there wasn't room for me."
That's awesome.
And that's the heart of Everybody Church.
I love that.
I don't want to be a part of a religion. I don't want to be a part of a church that leaves beautiful people out. And one of the mama bears just texted. I was just looking at my phone. One of the mama bears at our church, she said, there's some mama bears who wouldn't call themselves Christians. There's some mama bears that at this point would call themselves agnostic or atheist. Do you include them?
Absolutely.
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 The Jesus that I understand includes them. Not even, please hear me, not in a patronizing, pat, come be with us, you'll get it like we have. I don't believe that anymore. I think everybody is on their journey. As long, whether they call themselves an atheist or a Christian or a Buddhist, as long as a person is honest and curious and courageous and humble and grateful and loving and aspiring to explore life and accept life as some gift and to do that with some sense of mutuality and love. I mean, that's what I call Christianity.
Yeah.
You call it whatever you want to call it. I don't care anymore. So yes, Everybody Church is for a whole lot more than just people who technically call themselves Christians.
Well, and I think people might be surprised. One of the gentlemen that helped us found Everybody Church, Neil, would not put himself in a Christian class at all.
Yeah.
He would say that he's leads atheist in many ways, but he is as important to what we do, and we love that. We love that because it's for everybody. It's for everybody.
Yeah, I've been taken to task a couple times. Of course, Neil's sitting back here doing the technology right now, but I've been taken to task. How could you have someone who calls himself an atheist, but they love church and they love Jesus? How could you allow them to be a part? And even the idea of allowing. I'm not allowing.
Yeah, we're not allowing anything.
I love his journey.
Me
He
too.
grew up in the same Christian church. You think I don't understand how a person could grow up in the world we grew up in and look at it and say, yeah, not so much. I trust his journey.
Me too.
I trust his journey. I actually think he's one of the finest examples of Jesus
Me too.
that I know. I mean, somebody who calls himself an atheist, and yet Jesus said, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life," not "I'm the doctrine, the teaching, and the dogma." I am a truthful way of living. I mean, who really approximates the life of Jesus? The southern deacon who has all of the doctrines but is still tacitly racist and, xenophobic? Or, Mahatma Gandhi, who was so deeply moved by the life of Jesus that he took it all the way to martyrdom.
I love that.
It's the way of life. It's not a doctrine to be believed.
I was thinking about Everybody Church and the fact that we have probably more people watching and hearing about Everybody Church maybe than any time since we began a few months ago. And I was thinking of things that they maybe could do that would be helpful for us. And number one is try to watch the service each week. And you don't have to watch it. It comes on 7 o'clock Eastern time on Sunday nights. But you don't have to watch it live, because just like this is going to be archived to be watched later, the same thing's true with those messages. They are on Everybody Church on the Facebook page. We also have a YouTube page, Everybody Church. It's there. So I would watch it, and what I find sometimes Stan teaches, this actually happens all the time when Stan teaches, and it is so deep and it resonates at so many levels to me that I'll watch it. My wife and I will usually try to watch it live when it comes on, but then I'll go back and watch it again early in the morning as I'm getting ready for work. I'll watch it again, and I'll hear something different. So it's only 30 minutes. The talks are about 30 minutes long, so I would do that. And then another way you can help us is if you share it with people. When you share little memes that maybe are posted, or we post something about Sarah Cunningham in the movie that's going to come, when we post something like that, and you see it and then you share it, that exposes more people to Everybody Church. And we believe that Everybody Church is a genuinely beautiful place that people can connect around, and they can be on this spiritual journey together, and it'll be a safe place. So I think that's something. And I was thinking about you, because as of midnight tonight, when this is being recorded, tomorrow night, you will no longer be the senior pastor at Grace Point. You are just the founding pastor now, and you'll be a member of that church, but you'll be kind of minister at large all over the country.
Yeah, right? A few years ago, after LGBTQ inclusion at Grace Point, I just began to realize people like us, I don't think we intended to be, but we found out we're at the front of a movement, and that movement is burgeoning and growing, and just the requirements of travel and helping the other churches that are beginning to spring up, the young ministers that are kind of following this trail, it was overwhelming enough that I just couldn't do the day-to-day operation of the church any longer. And so that church is an incredible church. It's just one of the most beautiful communities in the world. And I knew that to do them justice, it was time for me to step aside and let the next chapter begin. So a new pastor, Josh Scott, who did inclusion in a rural community in southern Kentucky.
Can you, Mama Bears, imagine that? Yeah. Rural community. And he takes a church to full inclusion. That's brilliant.
I love Jonathan Williams and Ryan Phipps in New York City, Ryan Meeks and the team there in Seattle, you in Atlanta, me in Nashville. Josh did this in Morgantown, Kentucky. And so he's a remarkable young man. He's coming to take the place. But I'm finding myself spread out everywhere now because these pastors are coming like Nicodemus came to Jesus. You remember in John 3, Nicodemus came to Jesus under the cover of night. He needed anonymity. He needed to come to Jesus privately. And he came to Jesus, and I'm being overwhelmed, not just by those that are reaching out to me for pastoral care in terms of, a family moving through this process, but the pastors that we were talking about a moment ago, they're reaching out to me under the cover of night, looking over both shoulders for fear of their livelihood being taken away, but pressed by their conscience. And so that's the work that I'm doing these days.
If I could say anything to you, Mama Bears, I know you follow Stan. I think that's one of the great things. You're following Stan. That's beautiful. Keep doing that, and then continue to share. When he posts those posts, continue to get them out, because that will have great impact on people that you share them with. Over time, those stories, I was thinking years and years ago, I had done the work where I had intellectually moved through inclusion, but I was still far away from being able to do it at church. But I spent some time with Tony and Peggy Campolo, and I don't remember much about what Tony said, but I remember Peggy told me stories. She told me a story of Randy McKay. So she tells me a story of this Arkansas pastor who is gay and who is married now. He was in had a partner, and they had been together for 25 years at the time. And it was like, it flabbergasted me. I had never thought, I still was in a box. I didn't realize, oh my gosh, not only LGBTQ included, but everything. They could be pastors. They could do it all. This is wide open. But it was stories. And then you tell your stories, and it's like, it's just the truth.
Stories move the needle.
They move my needle. I can guarantee you that.
The whole reason you're a mama bear or connected to this group is because you're living a story.
Yeah, your stories, Mama Bears, your stories, they rock us. They move us. You keep telling your stories. They're the best stories ever. Stan, we're getting close to winding up, so I just want to ask you if you would say a word. We have 5 minutes. If you would just say a word.
Ray, I've got a question from the chat room. In the current political climate, many of the battles we thought we won for our kids seem to be going backwards. What's happening?
I'll start quickly and just say we are going backwards at some level, but I think that I'm really glad that when these edicts are announced, that normally the career military people say, we're not going to get rid of the transgenders in the military. I mean, they know that these transgender people have paid enormous price and are valuable and love our country and have been heroic in every way. So a lot of it, I think, is noise at the top, but it doesn't seem to ever really filter out to where they would be kicked out.
I'm counting on that.
I'm counting on
big
that, too.
time, but we cannot rely on it to the point that
Can't let
the
our guard
reality
down.
is
Yeah.
the last few years have proven to us we may not have been as far down the road as we
Correct.
thought we were. And I think we may have gotten a little bit lax and kind of put it on cruise control to some extent. So I do think we're going to have to double down. We're going to have to dig our feet in because there's still a lot of work to do. And we could go backwards. And I think there's a healthy, I don't want to call it fear because, man, I never want to give in to fear, but there is a reasonable concern that makes us lift our voices loudly. And there will be moments in any reform movement, there is a 3-step forward, 2-step backward. I do believe. I mean, I was walking around the National Historic Park here in Atlanta, the Martin Luther King Jr. I was in Ebenezer yesterday, walking around that stated church where so much happened on behalf of civil rights. But as I walked outside of the church, and I saw that beautiful fountain and the text from Amos that justice is rolling down. And I thought about King and his words that the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice. But the reality is evil is still here. And though we are ultimately in our hearts believing that love is going to win, sometime evil and hate rallies.
They do.
And we have to keep our voices lifted, and we cannot rest on our laurels right now. And if ever there was a time that we need groups like Mama Bears pressing this issue, we got to keep the press on.
You have to keep the
We
press
got to keep
on.
the press on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and in terms of, gosh, and I told you before we even had the privilege of doing this today, I said, if there's one thing that I want to do, I just want to look into the hearts of these women, these mothers. And I've already said it, it's not always going to feel this way. I want to tell you that you are going to come to a place of soul satisfaction on this issue where you're going to look back and you're going to be able to say with Joseph, I said this in a message a few weeks ago, where Joseph, literally on the heels of all the devastation that he went through, that beautiful story in the book of Genesis, betrayed by his brothers, forsaken and improperly imprisoned, Joseph looked back on his life and he said, the Lord has made me forget the sorrow. And that is a profound statement. It's when they brought his little baby to him and he said, call him Manasseh, which meant forgetting. For the Lord has made me forget. I used to do this as a Pentecostal preacher, and every now and then I feel to do it again. This is a word. It is specifically for Mama Bears. That the pain that you're feeling right now, those of you that are deeply in pain, there's coming a day, and I pray it won't be too long, that you're going to be able to say with Joseph, the Lord has made me forget the sorrow. And you're going to realize that divine forgetting is not the erasure of memory. You don't need to forget the event because the event is going to drive you in your love for your child and your future ministry and the people who you're going to be able to impact. You don't need to forget the event. You need to forget what God has done through all of this. Joseph said, the Lord has made me forget the sorrow. Divine forgetting is not the erasure of memory. It's the ability to remember the event, the time, the space. The ability to remember the event and to feel healing and not the sting of bitterness and sorrow that comes up. And that's a work that is divine that we can't do on ourselves, but we simply have to lay our heart bare, open to the sacred and say, God, you're going to have to help me here. And you found a community, and that community called Serendipitydodah. Mama Bears, free mom hugs with Sarah Cunningham. You found a community that's going to be a healing place for you. And you will one day say that you were afflicted that you might comfort others with the comfort wherewith God has comforted you. You're going to look back and say, I thought that was an IV that was opening me to pain that was unbearable. And I finally realized it was a funnel that opened me to a dimension of grace that I would have never known without that sorrow. And now you're going to be a comforter. That's exactly what Liz Dyer and Sarah Cunningham, women who didn't handle it right in the beginning,
Right.
but their hearts broke, their minds opened, their hearts healed, and now they're healing the hearts of others. That's
awesome.
exactly
That
who
is
Mama
awesome.
Bears are. I'm glad you're a part, and we feel like we serve Mama Bears and Serendipitydodah. We come from that old, that preacher cast where preachers are at the top of the heap. I am totally willing to admit right now in this thing called the beloved community, us preachers are starting to be the assistant pastors
Yeah.
to the Sarah Cunninghams and the Liz
That's exactly
Dyers,
right.
and I feel honored
I
to
do
be
too.
just that.
This has been wonderful. Thank y'all so very much for being with us.